Hey everybody, this is Miss Moriarty, and I'm here to discuss with us the remaining topics in our Unit 6 about different types of fuel types. So in this video, I'm going to talk about geothermal energy, the use of hydrogen fuel cells, as well as wind energy. So in looking at geothermal energy, this is a type of renewable energy resource. This type of energy actually comes from the Earth's core. Here we can see that energy is obtained by then heating up water that was then once heated in the Earth's interior. This water is typically brought up to the surface and used to maybe drive some sort of electrical generator. Sometimes, if it may be used in like a building or a home of some sorts, the actual heated water itself can be transmitted around the home and naturally heat the home via a piping type system. Kind of similar to how our other fuel types might generate electricity using turbines. That hot water, which we know converts into steam, can turn a turbine, and then that kinetic energy of that turbine is then transformed to electricity. Now, the cost of accessing geothermal energy is a part of the reason why we don't see it everywhere. It's not necessarily easily accessible. We tend to only find it in very specific parts of the world. A part of geothermal energy as well, besides it being potentially expensive, also has, unfortunately, the potential to release what's called hydrogen sulfide gas. So, in just looking at the overall advantages or disadvantages of geothermal, we know it's a renewable energy resource. We know it's not going to emit carbon emissions such as fossil fuels. And we also know that in establishing a geothermal plant, it can also create jobs in that local area. Disadvantages, it tends to really only be available in certain areas of the world where we're going to see that available type of hot spring or place in the world where we can see that that warmer area of Earth can be used. Now, because it's not widely used, the infrastructure that is used to create the equipment and hire the workers is somewhat lacking at this point. But this is still an energy source that is continue to be up and coming, and the areas that can implement geothermal are now continuing to implement that. The next topic is hydrogen fuel cells. A hydrogen fuel cell is a renewable resource, so it's an alternate to using any non renewable fuel source. Here we can actually use hydrogen gas as the fuel. When we combine that hydrogen with an oxygen, what's going to happen is a release of energy, which can be transformed to electricity, is produced, and water vapor is then released as a waste product. Now, a part of using hydrogen fuel cells, however, is to isolate the hydrogen gas itself. Since typically found on Earth, it's actually normally bonded to other atoms. So, a part of hydrogen fuel cells is the fact that it can be really expensive and energy intensive in order to isolate that hydrogen gas. But when used properly, it has a low environmental impact, doesn't produce any carbon emissions, because the only thing that is produced would be our water vapor. Now, looking at the diagram, how does hydrogen fuel cells actually work? A hydrogen molecule is then split into its protons and electrons in the upper layer of the reaction platform. Protons are then going to move across then that membrane, and those electrons then take a alternate route to create an electrical current. Oxygen molecules are then split and combined with the leftover protons and electrons to form our water vapor, which winds up being our waste product in this case. Now, I remember I said a part of the issue with using hydrogen fuel cells is to be able to isolate the hydrogen gas. Separating hydrogen gas, we actually usually take it from either water or maybe even methane, CH4. Two processes used to isolate that hydrogen gas are steam reforming and electrolysis. In steam reforming, we can take CH4, natural gas, combust it, use steam to then separate the hydrogen gas from the methane, or electrolysis, which is a slightly different method, a little more pricey. Here we send an electrical current through to maybe a water molecule, H2O, breaking and separating the O2 and the hydrogen. So overall, what are our pros? What are our cons of using hydrogen fuel cells? We know that the waste product is pure water, has zero carbon emissions. It doesn't destroy any wildlife habitats in its construction and has very minimal environmental impact. It can be easily transported or even stored. However, it must be stored safely because hydrogen gas is explosive. As of right now, we don't really use this for powering cars, but it is a potential in the future if we then continue to increase the equipment and the pieces used to create hydrogen fuel cells. We also know that it takes lots of energy to isolate the hydrogen gas. And we have to be careful in how we're isolating the hydrogen gas. If we happen to use methane versus water, we might actually produce some carbon emissions in that sense. And then lastly, looking at wind energy. So this would be using wind turbines and harnessing the kinetic energy of the movement of those turbines to turn that into electricity. So here in the image to the left, we can see here are the blades that get turned by the wind. Here would be the gearbox, and where that mechanical energy is turned into that generator, and that generator converts that mechanical into electrical energy. We know wind energy is a renewable, clean energy source, but some of the problems associated with wind energy usually come up in looking at how it might impact things like birds or bats. What they have found sometimes is that these types of species may actually fly into the spinning turbine and unfortunately may be killed. Now, some other disadvantages to our wind energy. It can actually create some noise pollution. And noise pollution is a concept we'll discuss in our unit 7 and 8. Because the spinning of the turbines can be a little loud, it has the potential to impact that local area. Oftentimes, people really don't think that they're aesthetically pleasing. So lots of people tend to not want them near their homes. Depending upon the season, we could see fluctuation in how much energy that wind turbine is able to harness. Because remember, it has to pick up speeds of winds between 8 to about 55 miles per hour in order to generate electricity. But in looking at its advantages, we know it's clean in terms of its emissions. It can be quite cheap to supply. And wind doesn't necessarily need a factory to be produced, right? And it can be recycled. All right, everybody, that is it for this video. Make sure tomorrow in class, be ready to debrief these different fuel types. Also, remember, I will be letting us know who we face off against first in the energy debate on Thursday.